In the wild lands of the West, betrayal rides faster than bullets, but those who endure the fire of treachery may rise forged into unbreakable steel. Genevieve gripped the rough wooden edge of the wagon, her knuckles white. A cloud of red dust erupted from behind the mesas, the sound of wild yells tearing through the afternoon calm. Riders emerged from the haze, their figures distorted by the heat rising from the baked earth. Her stepfather, Alistair, sat beside her, his face pale, but his eyes held a chillingly calm resolve that did not match the unfolding chaos. He did not reach for the rifle secured beside him. Instead, his gaze was fixed forward, as if looking through the approaching danger to a destination only he could see. The pounding of hooves grew louder, a thunderous heartbeat, counting down the final moments of her old life. One of the bandits, a burly man with a sun-scorched face, veered his horse close to their wagon, a triumphant grin on his face. Genevieve instinctively recoiled, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked to Alistair for protection, for some sign of action. Instead of defending her, he turned, his movements swift and deliberate. With a powerful shove, he pushed her from the speeding wagon. The world became a blur of sky and spinning wheels. She landed hard on the rocky ground, the impact stealing the air from her lungs. The last thing she saw was the wagon continuing its frantic pace, disappearing into the dust without a single backward glance. The thunder of hooves faded into the distance, replaced by an unnerving silence. Genevieve lay on the ground, a sharp pain radiating from her shoulder. The thick dust slowly settled around her, coating her simple calico dress in a layer of red grit. She pushed herself up, wincing, and stared at the empty trail where the wagon had been. There was no sign of it, no sign of anyone. The bandits had vanished as quickly as they had appeared. The chilling realization washed over her. It was not just an attack, it was a calculated act of abandonment. He had thrown her away like unwanted cargo, a simple, brutal solution to a problem she never knew she was. She stood alone in the vast, indifferent expanse of the prairie. The sun beat down relentlessly, and the horizon shimmered in the oppressive heat. There was no water, no shelter, only the endless sky and the rust-colored earth. A profound sense of desolation settled upon her, heavier than the heat itself. Every direction looked the same, a landscape devoid of hope. Alistair had not just left her to the bandits, he had left her to the wilderness, condemning her to a slow, certain demise. The bitterness of his betrayal was a poison spreading through her, more painful than any physical injury. She was utterly and completely alone. The world began to fade at the edges, the harsh sunlight turning into a hazy blur. Genevieve stumbled forward, her strength failing, before collapsing onto the parched ground. Her consciousness drifted, submerged in waves of pain and exhaustion. Through the haze, she heard the soft thud of approaching horses, a different rhythm from the bandits' frantic charge. Dark shapes on horseback materialized out of the shimmering heat, circling her slowly. She could not muster the strength to be afraid. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the encroaching darkness, a silent figure in a vast and unforgiving land. Makia, a Comanche war leader, reined in his horse, his dark eyes studying the scene. His party had been tracking the same outlaws for 2 days. The tracks told a strange story. A single wagon, the pursuing bandits, and then the wagon continuing on, leaving this lone woman behind. He dismounted and knelt beside her. He saw the scrapes and the exhaustion, but he also saw something else in the flicker of her barely open eyes. It was not the vacant look of a victim, but a spark of defiance, a burning ember in the ashes of despair. This was not a simple raid gone wrong. The spirits of the land were telling him a different story. One of his warriors, a young man named Tuma, spoke in a low voice. The elders said to avoid them, to let their world consume itself. Makia nodded, his gaze still on Genevieve. The orders had been clear. Observe the outlaws, but do not engage unless they threaten their people. Delivering this woman to the nearest fort would invite questions and unwanted attention. Yet leaving her here felt like a greater offense, a disharmony with the world. He made a decision that went against caution. "We are not leaving her," he said, his voice firm. "She is part of this trail now. Her story is tied to ours." Makia gently lifted Genevieve into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, as fragile as a bird. He mounted his horse, settling her in front of him, and the war party continued its journey, their pace now slower, more deliberate. Genevieve drifted in and out of awareness, catching fragmented images. The stoic faces of the warriors, the feel of strong arms holding her steady, the rhythmic sway of the horse. It was a stark contrast to the violent shove that had cast her out. In the hands of men her people called savages, she felt a strange and unexpected sense of security. Genevieve awoke to the smell of wood smoke and unfamiliar herbs. She was lying on a soft buffalo robe inside a teepee, the light filtering softly through the hide. A Comanche woman with kind eyes and gentle hands tended to her shoulder, applying a soothing poultice of ground yucca root and cool clay. The woman offered her water in a clay cup, moving with a quiet grace that was both calming and foreign. Genevieve drank gratefully, her fear slowly giving way to a cautious curiosity about the people who had saved her. For the first time since the attack, she felt a glimmer of hope. Later, Makia entered the teepee, ducking his head to pass through the opening. He sat cross-legged across from her, his presence filling the small space. He did not speak immediately, allowing the silence to settle comfortably between them. "The men who did this," he finally said, his English slow but clear. "What did you know of them?" Genevieve hesitated, the memory of Alistair's face flashing in her mind. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. She simply shook her head, claiming she had never seen them before, a partial truth that felt like a heavy lie. Over the next few days, as her strength returned, she began to talk more. She spoke of her long journey west and of Alistair's increasingly cold and distant behavior. She described the raid, but still could not bring herself to speak of the final, brutal push. Makia listened without interruption, his gaze never leaving her face. He pieced together her words with what he had seen in the tracks. The bandits had not acted like typical raiders. Their pursuit was too direct, their goal too specific. He sensed a deeper deception at play, a snake hiding in the tall grass. A quiet understanding grew between them. Makia would bring her broth and sit with her, sometimes speaking of the land, of the hawk and the coyote, and other times just sharing the silence. Genevieve, in turn, started to see beyond the fierce warrior. She saw a man of deep thought and quiet strength, a leader who commanded respect through wisdom, not fear. His inherent nobility was a stark and painful contrast to the treachery of her own kin. A fragile bond was forming, woven from shared moments and unspoken respect in the heart of the Comanche camp. Makia knew he could not rely on her fragmented story alone. The truth was a trail that needed to be followed with skill and patience. He summoned his two most trusted scouts, Tuma and Kono, men who could move like shadows and read the land like an open book. "Follow the wagon's path," he instructed them in their native tongue. "Find the man who drove it. Watch him. Learn where he goes and who he speaks to. Do not be seen." He needed to understand the purpose behind the betrayal he felt so strongly. The scouts nodded and melted into the landscape, their mission clear. The scouts were gone for 5 days. They returned just after sunset, their horses weary and their faces etched with grim certainty. They spoke with Makia by the fire, their voices low and urgent, the words of the Comanche language flowing like a swift, dark river. Genevieve watched from a distance, her stomach twisting with a mixture of dread and anticipation. She could not understand their words, but she could read the gravity in their expressions. The truth, whatever it was, had been found. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that it would change everything. The scouts' report was worse than Makia had imagined. They had tracked Alistair to a desolate canyon 2 days right away. There, hidden from prying eyes, he had met with a group of men. The leader was a rough-looking outlaw with a black patch covering one eye. The scouts watched as Alistair handed over several crates from the wagon. There was no hostility, no tension. Instead, there was a handshake, a passing of a heavy coin pouch, and even shared laughter. The raid had been a performance, a carefully staged play, with a predetermined and brutal conclusion for his stepdaughter. Makia walked to the teepee where Genevieve was mending a tear in her dress. He sat before her, his heart heavy with the news he had to deliver. Gently, but without softening the edges of the truth, he told her everything. He described the meeting in the canyon, a handshake with the man called One-Eyed Jack, the exchange of goods. The attack was a lie, he said, his voice steady. A plan between your stepfather and the outlaws. He paid them to help him get rid of you. Each word was a hammer blow, shattering the last fragile remnants of Genevieve's past. The truth did not bring tears. It brought a profound and terrifying emptiness. The man who had raised her, the only family she had left, had conspired to have her eliminated. The foundation of her world crumbled into dust, leaving her adrift in a sea of betrayal. Genevieve retreated into herself, wrapping a shroud of silence around her. She would sit for hours, staring into the fire, her expression vacant, her spirit seemingly broken. The Comanche people gave her space, understanding that some wounds of the soul must be tended to in solitude. Makia watched her from a distance, his concern growing. He had seen this kind of grief before. It was a powerful spirit that could consume a person, leaving an empty shell behind. He resisted the urge to comfort her with words, knowing they would be useless. Instead, he simply made his presence known. He would leave a bowl of fresh berries by her teepee in the morning, or ensure her fire never went out during the cold nights. It was a silent vigil, a warrior's way of standing guard over a wounded soul, waiting for the battle within to be won or lost. On the third day, the emptiness in her eyes was replaced by something else, a flicker of light, hard and sharp as flint. She emerged from her teepee, her posture straight, her chin held high. The grief had not broken her. It had been forged into something new, something dangerous. She found Makia sharpening an arrowhead by the creek. "He thinks I am gone," she said, her voice low and devoid of any tremor. "He thinks he has won. He is wrong." The victim was gone, and in her place stood a woman with a singular, burning purpose. Makia looked up from his work, his eyes meeting hers. He saw the transformation, the birth of a huntress. Her pain had become her strength. He nodded slowly, a deep respect dawning in his expression. "A man who betrays his own blood has no honor," he said. "Such a man poisons the ground he walks on." He stood, placing the finished arrowhead into his quiver. "You will not face him alone, Genevieve. His crime was against you, but his deception is an insult to us all. We will help you find justice." Their hands did not touch, but an unbreakable pact was sealed between them. That night, they sat by the main fire, the council of warriors listening intently. A direct attack on Alistair's new settlement, or One-Eyed Jack's camp, would be foolish and costly. "They are united by greed," Makia explained, his hands gesturing in the firelight. "It is a strong bond, but it is also their greatest weakness. A bond of greed can be broken by a greater greed." He looked at Genevieve, inviting her insight. She was the key, the one who understood the minds of her enemies better than any warrior could. Genevieve spoke, her voice clear and steady. "Alistair is a coward. His entire life is built on the appearance of wealth and respectability. One-Eyed Jack is a brute, driven by pride and a simple, all-consuming desire for more." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Jack would not care about honor, but he would never tolerate being cheated. Alistair would sacrifice anything, or anyone, to protect his fortune. We must make them believe one has betrayed the other." The warriors murmured in agreement, seeing the wisdom in her strategy. The plan began to form, a clever trap built from lies. They would not invent a story of revenge, but one of hidden treasure. "We will let it be known that the supplies in the wagon were a distraction," Genevieve elaborated. "That the real prize was a secret shipment of gold, a prize Alistair kept entirely for himself." Makia added, "The rumor must be planted carefully, like a seed in the wind. It must travel far before it reaches Jack, so it arrives smelling of truth and the trail, not of our making." Makia selected two of his most resourceful men, warriors who had traded with settlers and knew their ways. They were not just fighters, they were storytellers, observers. "You will not speak of us," Makia commanded. "You will speak of whispers you heard from a drunken trapper, of rumors from a merchant in a faraway town. Let the story grow its own legs. Let Jack hear it from a dozen different mouths until he believes it is his own discovery." The messengers accepted their task, understanding the delicate and dangerous nature of the game they were about to play. Miles away, in a grimy saloon filled with the scent of stale beer and desperation, the first seed was planted. One of Makia's men, dressed as a weary trapper, shared a drink with a known associate of Jack's gang. He spoke in a low, conspiratorial tone about a foolish stepdaughter left in the desert and a clever stepfather who hid a false bottom in his wagon. "Filled with gold coins, they say," the trapper whispered before paying for his drink and vanishing into the night, leaving the story to fester. The tale traveled like a prairie fire. A stable hand in another town, paid with a single silver dollar, mentioned to one of Jack's men that he had helped Alistair unload an unusually heavy crate in the dead of night, just before the supposed raid. At a remote trading post, a merchant, prompted by Machia's other messenger, casually remarked how Alistair had paid for a massive order of supplies with brand-new, freshly minted gold pieces, far more than the goods on the wagon were worth. The whispers finally reached the ears of One-Eyed Jack. At first, he dismissed them as saloon gossip, but the stories kept coming, from different sources, each adding a small, believable detail. His men started to murmur amongst themselves. They recalled how Alistair had rushed them away from the wagon. They remembered that their payment, while decent, did not seem to match the risk. The poison of suspicion began to work its way through the outlaw camp, turning camaraderie into distrust. One-Eyed Jack sat alone in his tent, the rumors echoing in his mind. Alistair's nervous demeanor, his haste to conclude their business, it all made sense now. The man had played him for a fool. The image of Alistair sitting on a pile of gold while he and his men risked their necks for mere scraps ignited a furious rage within him. The betrayal he felt was absolute. He had been cheated, and for a man like One-Eyed Jack, there was no greater crime. He gathered his most loyal men, his one good eye burning with a desire for retribution. One-Eyed Jack and his riders descended on Alistair's newly acquired ranch like a storm. They did not announce their arrival with a polite call, but with the sound of galloping horses and the clatter of drawn firearms. Alistair rushed out onto his porch, his face a mask of confusion. "Jack, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, trying to project an authority he did not feel. Jack dismounted, his movement stiff with anger. "The game is over, Alistair," he snarled. "I am here for my share. My real share." Alistair's confusion turned to genuine terror. "What are you talking about? I paid you exactly what we agreed upon." His denial was passionate and sincere, but in the eyes of the enraged outlaw, it looked like the desperate pleading of a cornered liar. "Do not play me for a fool," Jack growled, stepping closer. "The gold, the secret compartment. I know everything." Alistair's mind raced, trying to comprehend the accusation. He had no idea what gold Jack was talking about, and his ignorance was sealing his fate. Words failed. Accusations became threats. One of Jack's men, jumpy and eager to prove his loyalty, raised his firearm. One of Alistair's ranch hands, startled by the sudden movement, did the same. A tense standoff ensued, a fragile moment where peace could have been restored. But the air was too thick with suspicion and greed. A single, panicked shot rang out, shattering the stillness. In an instant, the ranch yard erupted into a chaotic exchange of fire, a maelstrom of confusion and violence. The alliance forged in deceit was consumed by it. Men who had been partners just days before now sought cover and fired at each other with deadly intent. Alistair scrambled back into his house, his plans for a quiet, wealthy life dissolving in the smoke and noise. The intricate trap, built on nothing more than whispers and the dark nature of men, had been sprung. From a rocky outcrop overlooking the ranch, Genevieve and Machia watched the chaos unfold, their plan working with brutal and devastating perfection. As the firefight devolved into a desperate, disorganized skirmish, Machia and Genevieve began their descent from the ridge. They moved with purpose, using the rocks and scrub for cover, unseen by the men below who were consumed by their own violent conflict. Machia carried his bow, his movements fluid and silent, while Genevieve held a rifle taken from one of the bandits, her grip firm and steady. There was no fear in her eyes, only a cold, focused resolve. The time for hiding was over. The time for justice had come. Machia moved like a phantom along the edges of the battle, his arrows finding their marks with silent precision, disabling the few outlaws who posed a threat from the flanks. He was not there to join the fight, but to shape it, to clear a path. He saw One-Eyed Jack, wounded and cornered behind a water trough. Their confrontation was brief. The outlaw, fierce but weakened, was no match for the Comanche warrior. Machia disarmed him, ending his reign of terror not with a killing blow, but with a final, decisive defeat. Genevieve stepped out from behind the cover of the stables, and walked calmly into the center of the ranch yard. The remaining fighters, startled by her sudden appearance, lowered their firearms one by one, staring as if they had seen a ghost. She ignored them, her gaze fixed on the main house. She walked towards the porch, her steps even and deliberate. Alistair, peering from behind a shattered window, saw her. His face went white with a terror that surpassed his fear of the bandits. The past he thought he had buried was walking toward him. "It is over, Alistair." Genevieve's voice was not loud, but it carried with absolute clarity across the now silent yard. She stopped at the foot of the porch steps. "There was no gold," she announced to the stunned men. "There was only his greed and his betrayal. He paid these men to get rid of me, his own stepdaughter." Her words, backed by her very presence, were undeniable proof. The last of Alistair's hired men dropped their weapons in disgust. He was alone, exposed and trapped by the truth. Just as the dust began to settle, a posse, led by the circuit marshal, rode into the ranch. Alerted by a timely and anonymous tip from one of Machia's men, they arrived to find a scene of chaos but a clear resolution. With the sworn testimony of Genevieve and the corroborating confessions of the captured and disillusioned outlaws, Alistair's fate was sealed. He was taken away in irons, his reputation shattered, his future a bleak landscape of bars and judgment. The law, slow but steady, had finally caught up to his crimes. In the days that followed, legal papers confirmed Genevieve as the sole heir to the ranch and her late mother's fortune. She walked through the house, touching the furniture, looking at the objects that had once defined her world, but they felt cold and foreign to her now. This place was not a home. It was a monument to a life built on lies. She realized with startling clarity that her inheritance was not a prize to be claimed, but a cage from which she needed to escape. Her future did not lie within these walls. She found Machia by the stream that ran along the edge of the property. He was watching an eagle soar high above the canyon. "I could never repay you for what you have done," she said softly. He turned, his gaze meeting hers. A small smile touched his lips. "You faced the truth, Genevieve. You found your own strength. A warrior's greatest victory is the one they win over the fear in their own heart. You won that battle." In his eyes, she saw not a savior, but an equal, a partner who had walked beside her through the darkness. Genevieve sold the ranch and everything in it to a family passing through, asking only for a fair price. She used the money not for dresses or comfort, but to purchase 2 strong horses and supplies for a long journey. She rode away from the life that had been chosen for her, not east toward the cities and societies she once knew, but west, into the vast open plains. Beside her rode Machia, toward a future they would build together, a life founded not on wealth or inheritance, but on the unshakable bedrock of honor, loyalty, and a love forged in the heart of the unforgiving West.